The restaurant was buzzing with life that evening. The soft murmur of conversation blended with the occasional clink of plates and glasses, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. The lights were dim, casting a cozy glow over polished wooden tables, each carefully set with shining silverware and folded napkins. Servers moved gracefully among the tables, their steps quiet but purposeful, attending to every need of the diners. It was one of those restaurants that made people feel comfortable but also special. A place where attention to detail mattered as much as the food. She stood near the entrance, apron neatly tied around her waist and a notepad in her hand. Her hair was pulled back into a tidy ponytail, and her posture was straight yet relaxed. She had been working at the restaurant for several years, and her movements had become second nature, quick, efficient, and almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But there was a rhythm to her work, a careful balance between speed and friendliness, professionalism and warmth. Even during the busiest nights, she never appeared flustered. Each customer was met with a polite smile, a greeting that made them feel seen. That evening, the door opened abruptly, letting in a sudden gust of cold air. A man walked in, his presence immediately noticeable. He carried himself with a kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His suit was perfectly tailored, shoes polished to a reflective shine, and the way he moved suggested he was used to getting what he wanted when he wanted it. Behind him were two companions, quietly following his lead. He scanned the restaurant with sharp eyes, as if assessing not only the place, but also the people working there. She approached the table with her notepad ready, offering a polite smile. "Good evening. Welcome. Can I start you off with some drinks?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. The man's eyes lingered on her for a moment. Then he let out a soft, dismissive scoff. "Yes, whatever. Just get them quickly. I don't have time to wait." There was a sharp edge in his tone, one that suggested he expected immediate compliance. She felt a small chill run through her, but she didn't show it. She had handled difficult customers before and knew that keeping her composure was the best response. "Yes, of course," she replied, jotting down the drinks on her notepad. She moved away from the table, her steps measured. She could feel his gaze following her, but she refused to acknowledge it. The restaurant was her space too, and no amount of arrogance would make her falter. The drinks were ready a few minutes later. She carefully placed them in front of the group, maintaining her polite smile. "Here are your drinks. Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" she asked. The man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "I don't like waiting. Make it quick. And make sure it's right this time," he said, emphasizing the last words as if warning her. She nodded, keeping her calm. "I'll take your order now," she said, flipping her notepad open. She could see his companions shifting slightly, exchanging quiet glances, perhaps uncomfortable with the tension, but unsure how to respond. The man seemed to thrive on it, enjoying the sense of control he had over everyone in the room. As she wrote down the order, he continued talking loudly, clearly used to dominating conversations. He spoke about his business deals, his travels, and his achievements, punctuating each story with a laugh that drew attention from nearby tables. Every now and then he glanced at her, a piercing look that seemed to search for a reaction. She ignored it, focusing instead on getting every detail of the order correct. Accuracy was her weapon in this small battle of patience and dignity. When she brought the first dish to him, he immediately found fault. "What is this?" he barked, pushing the plate slightly. "I asked for no sauce, and this is covered in sauce. Are you incompetent or just careless?" His words echoed slightly in the restaurant, drawing the attention of other diners. She felt a quick rush of heat in her chest, a mix of anger and embarrassment, but she refused to let it show. "I apologize," she said softly. I'll have the chef prepare a new one immediately, exactly as you requested. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the sting she felt inside. He let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. Trash, that's what you are. Working here must be a step down for someone like you, he said, clearly intending to humiliate her in front of everyone. Her stomach tightened, but she held her composure. She simply nodded and replied, I'm very sorry. I'll make sure your meal is perfect this time. With that, she turned and walked away, taking a deep breath to steady herself. In the kitchen, she relayed the corrected order to the chef, double-checking every detail. Her coworkers glanced at her, some offering silent encouragement, but she gave them a small, reassuring nod. She could handle this. She had handled worse. Meanwhile, the man continued to make remarks to his companions, pointing out small flaws in service and laughing at every imagined mistake. The other diners could feel the tension radiating from the table, and a few glanced over, whispering quietly. His companions seemed uneasy, exchanging glances as if silently signaling their discomfort. But no one dared challenge him. They seemed trapped between loyalty and embarrassment. She returned to the table with the corrected dish, placing it carefully in front of him. Here is your meal, prepared exactly as you requested, she said, keeping her tone even. He looked at it for a brief moment, then shrugged and began to eat. She stayed nearby, ready to assist if necessary, keeping her professional composure intact. Though he muttered under his breath, making small complaints that seemed designed to frustrate her, she remained unshaken. She understood that responding with anger would only escalate the situation, so she focused on doing her job perfectly instead. The rest of the meal passed with her moving between tables, attending to other diners, refilling drinks, and ensuring everyone was happy. She noticed how the restaurant's atmosphere slowly returned to normal, the earlier tension fading. Guests laughed, chatted, and enjoyed their meals, oblivious to the silent struggle that had been taking place nearby. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing she had managed the situation without losing her composure. When the group finally left, she cleared the table efficiently, her coworkers offering quiet words of support. The manager gave her a small nod of approval, clearly impressed by her patience and professionalism. She smiled faintly, grateful for the recognition, but did not linger. The night was far from over, and she had to maintain her focus dot as she went back to her duties. She reflected on what had happened. Being insulted in public was never easy, but it revealed more about the person delivering the words than about her. She knew her worth, her skills, and her patience. True strength, she realized, was shown through calmness, grace, and the ability to keep moving forward despite challenges. The restaurant buzzed with life, the earlier tension now just a memory. She moved among the tables with practiced ease, offering polite smiles and attentive service. Guests felt cared for, unaware of the invisible strength behind her calm demeanor. She had maintained her dignity when someone tried to take it away, and that gave her a quiet sense of power. Arrogance and loud words might grab attention, she thought, but quiet confidence spoke louder dot as the evening wore on. She helped clean tables, reset chairs, and guided the remaining guests with patience. She reflected on the night, feeling proud that she had handled the situation without losing her professionalism. She had been tested, and she had passed not with anger, but with calm, skill, and dignity. In her mind, she had already claimed victory. The arrogant man might have thought he had won in that moment, but she knew the truth. Control, respect, and composure were hers. No matter what words were thrown at her dot, by the time the last guests left, she was exhausted but content. The restaurant was quiet once more, the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint sound of dishes being stacked in the kitchen, replacing the lively chatter. She had faced a challenge, kept her composure, and reminded herself of her own value. That night, She had not only served food, but had demonstrated patience, courage, and strength qualities that no insult could ever take away. And in that quiet satisfaction, she found a strength that the arrogant words of one man could never touch. She returned to her station after the long evening, carrying the calm satisfaction of having handled the arrogant man with dignity. But beneath her composed exterior, her mind was alive with thoughts about who she was and why she had chosen this path. To anyone in the restaurant, she might have seemed like just another server, doing her job with skill and patience. But her life outside the apron told a very different story. Years ago, when the restaurant was just a small, struggling venture, she had quietly invested in it. She had chosen to remain a silent partner, keeping her identity hidden from most people, including the staff and the patrons. She wanted to help the restaurant grow, but she never sought recognition. For her, the joy had always been in seeing things flourish quietly, in watching the team succeed, and in understanding the business from the inside. She didn't want fame or acknowledgement. She wanted knowledge, experience, and the satisfaction of contributing in a meaningful way. Working as a waitress wasn't a fallback. It was a choice. She wanted to see how the restaurant functioned on the ground level. She wanted to understand the rhythm of the staff, the demands of the kit, Chun, and the moods of the customers. She believed that every part of a business mattered, and that to lead effectively, one needed to know the reality behind the scenes. Most people would never guess that the woman taking their orders, the one quietly moving through the crowded tables with polite smiles, was secretly an owner. That was exactly how she liked it. She remembered the early days vividly. The restaurant had been tiny, with only a handful of tables and a struggling chef who barely made ends meet. Many nights had been long, filled with uncertainty about whether there would even be enough customers to cover expenses. But she had seen something special in that place, something worth investing in. She had kept her investment secret because she didn't want her presence to change how the staff worked or how the customers experienced the service. She wanted the restaurant to grow organically, to thrive based on the passion of the team and the quality of the food. Her mind wandered back to the arrogant man who had insulted her just hours earlier. In that moment, she had remained calm, professional, and composed. But the truth was that she had the power to make a difference far beyond that table. If he had known who she really was, he might not have spoken at all, or perhaps he would have regretted every word. But she didn't need him to recognize her authority. Her confidence and skill were enough. And someday, circumstances might reveal her role in a way that would shock those who underestimated her as she wiped down tables and organized utensils. She noticed her coworkers moving efficiently around the restaurant, some exchanging small, knowing smiles. A few of them had sensed the tension at the arrogant man's table and admired how she had handled it. But none of them knew the full story. She liked it that way. There was something empowering about working among people who didn't know your full story, about quietly holding a position of influence while blending seamlessly into the daily operations. Her reflections were interrupted by the manager, approaching her quietly. "You handled that well tonight," he said softly. "Most people would have lost their cool or reacted badly. You stayed calm and professional." She offered a small smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice even, though inside she felt a flicker of pride. It wasn't praise she sought. It was the satisfaction of knowing she had stayed true to herself. She thought about the man's companions, who had seemed uncomfortable with his behavior. It reminded her that not everyone in the world would accept arrogance or cruelty. Some people were observant, and some could sense when someone else's behavior crossed the line. In the restaurant, she had witnessed this many times. Patrons often noticed kindness or skill, even if it wasn't spoken about, and staff members appreciated fairness and composure in ways that didn't always require acknowledgement. That understanding gave her strength. While she moved through her evening tasks, she also reflected on her long-term vision for the restaurant. She had helped guide decisions behind the scenes, menu changes, supplier choices, marketing strategies, but always quietly. The restaurant's success wasn't about her ego. It was about creating a place where people could enjoy food, feel respected, and witness genuine care from the staff. Her time as a server was her way of staying connected to that reality. It reminded her why she had invested in the first place. At home later that night, she reviewed her mental notes from the day. She thought about how people underestimated others based on appearances, assuming that a simple uniform or position reflected ability. That was exactly what the arrogant man had done. He had seen a waitress and immediately assumed she had no influence, no skill, no authority. He had mocked her with cruel words, certain that she would be powerless to respond. But appearances were deceptive. She had chosen her role carefully, understanding the value of humility, discretion, and patience. And she knew that when the time came, she could step forward in ways that would change perceptions entirely. She remembered other moments in her journey. There had been times when she had quietly handled challenges far bigger than any rude customer, a supplier trying to overcharge, a financial setback, or a staff disagreement that threatened the harmony of the kitchen. In each situation, she had chosen observation first, intervention second. She believed in understanding the full picture before acting. That mindset had served her well in business and in life. It was what had allowed her to remain calm when insulted, and to see opportunity where others saw only conflict. Thinking about the arrogant man again, she allowed herself a small private smile. He had thought he had power over her in that moment, but power was more than words or status. True power was knowledge, discretion, and patience, the ability to influence outcomes without needing to announce oneself. She had all of that. And one day, the truth of her role would be clear to those who assumed they were superior. Until then, she would continue to work, to observe, and to grow quietly in influence. Her thoughts also turned to the restaurant staff, who worked tirelessly every day. She admired their dedication, their effort to create a welcoming environment, and their resilience in the face of difficult customers. As a silent partner, she had always wanted to support them in ways they didn't see, through improvements in scheduling, fair wages, and behind-the-scenes decisions that made their work easier. Her presence as a server was partly a learning experience, but also a testament to her respect for those who made the restaurant function smoothly every day. She understood their struggles, their challenges, and their triumphs, and she wanted to honor that in those quiet late hours. She also reflected on the lessons of humility and resilience. She had learned early on that life did not always hand respect or recognition to those who deserved it. Often, people who underestimated others did so out of ignorance or arrogance. But she had also learned that the impact of quiet, thoughtful action often outweighed loud displays of superiority. She had seen it in business deals, in staff interactions, and now in the arrogant man who had tried to humiliate her. The lesson was clear. Appearances could be deceiving, and patience and strategy were far more effective than confrontation. As she prepared to leave the restaurant, she took a final glance around the empty dining room. The tables were cleared, the floors spotless, and the atmosphere calm once again. She felt a sense of accomplishment, not just for managing a difficult customer, but for maintaining her dignity, composure, and purpose throughout the evening. It was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, to understand the business from every angle, to respect those around her, and to quietly wield influence without needing to announce it. Walking to her car that night, she thought about the future. One day, she would reveal her role to the world in a way that would make people rethink their assumptions. Until then, she would continue to work, to learn, and to lead quietly from behind the scenes. That knowledge gave her a sense of power and calm that no insult or arrogance could shake. She understood her worth, her skill, and her influence. And that was more than enough. She smiled to herself, knowing that while some people relied on loud words and intimidation to feel powerful, she had a deeper understanding of what real influence meant. It was in patience, composure, quiet observation, and strategic action. And she carried that knowledge with her like a shield, one that no rude comment or disrespect could penetrate. In her heart, she felt a quiet pride, one that would carry her through challenges far bigger than any she had faced so far. That night, as she drove home under the city lights, she reflected on the lessons of the evening. She had been tested, humiliated, and underestimated, yet she had remained unshaken. The arrogant man had shown his true character, and she had revealed hers through action, not words. She knew that the story wasn't over. Life had a way of bringing such moments back around, often in surprising ways. And when that time came, she would be ready not with anger or revenge, but with the quiet, unassailable power of someone who had always known her worth. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but beneath it she felt the ripple of the previous encounter with the arrogant man still lingering. Life in the restaurant continued, as it always did, with the familiar hum of conversation, laughter, and the steady rhythm of service. The smell of fresh bread, sizzling food, and warm coffee filled the air, wrapping the space in a comforting embrace. Yet every time she passed the entrance or heard the faint sound of someone in an expensive suit, she remembered the man's words, the arrogance, the mockery, the sense that his money somehow made him superior. She moved through her shifts as usual, taking orders, serving meals, and quietly observing everything around her. But now she had a sharper awareness of how people behaved when they believed themselves untouchable. She noticed small things: a customer leaning too close, a dismissive glance, the way someone spoke over a server as if their voice mattered more. She had learned to see these patterns, to understand the subtle ways power was displayed, even when it wasn't loudly announced. It wasn't enough to serve well. She needed to understand people, their behaviors, their expectations, and their weaknesses. The restaurant staff looked to her in small ways. Not openly, not like they would to a manager, but in quiet glances, subtle nods, moments where her presence reassured them. They didn't know her full story, her role as a silent partner, the years she had invested, or the knowledge she held, but they could sense her confidence. It came across in the calmness with which she handled difficult customers, the way she anticipated needs before anyone asked, and the way she moved through the dining room, with purpose but without arrogance. In a way, she was both part of them and above them, a subtle figure of quiet authority. Meanwhile, she had started hearing rumors about the man who had insulted her. Word traveled quickly in business circles, and the restaurant, now gaining attention for its quality and charm, had become a place that executives and entrepreneurs visited. She learned that he was a well-known CEO, someone who prided himself on controlling situations and commanding respect. But the more she heard about him, the more she realized how predictable his behavior was. He relied on fear, on sharp words, on the assumption that others would bend to his will because of his title and money. In other words, he believed that appearances equaled power, but appearances could be deceiving. One evening, as she was clearing tables, she noticed a familiar presence at the door. It was the same man, dressed in the same expensive suit, this time accompanied by 2 new associates. His posture had the same air of superiority, the same expectation that the world would yield to him. He didn't notice her immediately, scanning the room for the staff who would serve him. She stayed calm, letting him move through the space without acknowledgement. She wanted to observe him first, to understand what he would do differently this time. She had learned that patience often revealed more than confrontation. He was seated near the center of the restaurant, the prime spot where he could see most of the dining room. His companions followed his lead silently, perhaps sensing the sharp edge of his personality. She approached the table as she always did, with a polite smile, taking care to note every detail of their initial requests. "Good evening. Welcome. Can I get you started with some drinks?" she asked, her voice calm and even. The man glanced at her briefly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Yes, bring them quickly. I'm not here to wait," he said, the sharpness in his tone identical to the first encounter. But she had changed. She no longer felt that twinge of tension that had shaken her before. She moved confidently, jotting down the drinks and returning to the kitchen. She had learned that calmness was a shield stronger than anger or confrontation. As the meal progressed, she noticed subtle changes in the way he interacted with his companions. He was still domineering, but she could sense slight frustration, small cracks in his armor. He seemed impatient not only with the staff, but also with them, as if his usual methods of control weren't working as smoothly. She observed quietly, noting every movement, every tone, every flicker of emotion. In the past, she might have felt nervous or defensive. Now, she felt a quiet curiosity, an interest in seeing how someone who believed himself untouchable would react when the rules of the game subtly shifted. She brought out their meals, carefully setting each plate with precision. This time, there were no mistakes. She had anticipated their preferences, double-checked the kitchen instructions, and ensured every detail was perfect. And yet, the man still found minor faults, small things to complain about, but they no longer had the power to disturb her. She stayed composed, responding politely and professionally, letting his words bounce off without affecting her. She had discovered a truth. Arrogance could create noise, but it could not shake someone who understood their own power and worth. During this interaction, she also noticed something unexpected. The man's companions, the ones who had seemed uneasy before, now exchanged small glances that suggested admiration or relief. Perhaps they were beginning to see the situation differently, recognizing that there were dynamics at play they hadn't considered. She realized that influence wasn't about being loud or intimidating. It was about presence, skill, and subtlety. By simply remaining composed, she was shifting the perception of those around her. As the evening went on, she reflected on her own journey. She remembered investing quietly in the restaurant, choosing to be a silent partner, and deliberately keeping her identity hidden. That decision had allowed her to observe, to learn, and to influence without interference. She understood the importance of discretion, of letting things unfold naturally, and of acting only when the time was right. The arrogant man had assumed that visibility and loudness equaled power, but she knew the real measure was much deeper. Later, she found herself in the office of the restaurant, reviewing inventory and schedules. She considered her options carefully, thinking strategically about upcoming changes, improvements, and potential opportunities. Being a silent partner didn't just mean financial investment. It meant responsibility, insight, and thoughtful decision-making. She wanted the restaurant to thrive, not just survive. And she understood that every small action, every carefully observed customer interaction, every staff meeting, every menu adjustment contributed to its long-term success. Her thoughts returned again to the CEO. He had shown arrogance and disrespect, but he had also revealed his vulnerabilities. He assumed that status gave him the right to demean others, to impose fear, to command unquestioned respect. Yet all his efforts had been met with her calm professionalism. He had underestimated her, as many people did, because he judged by appearances and titles alone. That mistake, she knew, could have consequences both for him and for those who underestimated the quiet strength of others. Days later, news arrived that the CEO's company was seeking a potential partnership with a local chain of restaurants. She was informed quietly, as part of her responsibilities, that he might approach the restaurant again with business proposals. She listened carefully, analyzing the information, considering her strategy. She knew that when the time came, she could turn the tables not with anger, not with confrontation, but with thoughtful action, planning, and influence that he would never see coming. Patience had become her ally, strategy her weapon. Her role as a silent partner had always been about more than money. It was about understanding the rhythms of people and businesses, about seeing beyond surface-level power, and about recognizing opportunity where others saw only obstacles. She had learned that sometimes the most influential people were the ones who didn't announce themselves, who worked quietly, and who moved deliberately. And she had proven this, first to herself, and now in her interactions with someone who assumed he could belittle and control her dot by the end of that week. She had observed enough to know that the CEO was not invincible. He relied on fear, on status, on appearances. But beneath that exterior was someone predictable, someone who could be influenced, not through confrontation, but through knowledge, discretion, and timing. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had the upper hand, not because she had spoken out loudly, but because she had remained steady, professional, and strategic. Her calm presence had shifted the dynamics of the situation without anyone realizing it fully. As she moved through her shifts, serving meals, attending to customers, and managing behind-the-scenes details, she carried this quiet awareness with her. She continued to learn, to observe, and to influence. She knew that the CEO might return, that circumstances could reveal her role to him or others at any time. And when that happened, she would be ready not with confrontation, but with the quiet authority and skill that had defined her from the beginning. She took a moment one evening to stand near the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The world outside was fast, loud, and often unfair, but inside the restaurant, she had cultivated a space of control, respect, and understanding. She had learned to navigate human behavior, to anticipate actions, and to recognize power when it was subtle. The arrogant man had underestimated her, and in doing so, he had revealed the truth about himself, that appearances were fragile, and real influence could not be bought, only earned. And in that quiet reflection, she understood one final lesson: patience, observation, and quiet strategy were stronger than arrogance, louder than insults, and more lasting than temporary displays of wealth or status. She had seen it in the CEO, in her colleagues, and in herself. And she knew, without a doubt, that the story was far from over, but when it reached its next chapter, she would be the one holding the true power, ready to act with the calm authority that no one could take away. Weeks passed, and the restaurant settled into its usual rhythm. The hum of conversations, the clatter of plates, and the aroma of fresh dishes were as comforting as ever. But beneath the surface, the world was shifting quietly. The arrogant CEO had made several attempts to connect with local business owners, and rumors suggested he was planning to approach the restaurant again. Unlike before, this time he wasn't coming just to dine. He was coming with proposals, ideas, and perhaps even influence in mind. She knew this day might come. She had prepared for it quietly, strategically, observing, planning, and understanding how he operated. She had learned the importance of timing, of patience, and of the quiet authority that came from knowing one's worth. Her presence as a waitress had been a cover, a way to learn every detail of the restaurant's operations, the staff, and even the tendencies of difficult customers like him. Now it was time for her careful preparation to meet its moment. The evening started like any other. Guests trickled in, the staff moved with their practiced efficiency, and the kitchen hummed with activity. She moved among the tables, offering polite smiles, taking orders, in keeping a careful eye on the restaurant. Every glance, every gesture, every moment was part of the rhythm she knew so well. She could feel the anticipation building, the quiet tension of knowing that someone with arrogance and power would soon enter this space. Believing he was in control, when the door opened, she felt it immediately. He walked in, accompanied by a small entourage, dressed impeccably as always, his expression one of confidence and entitlement. He scanned the restaurant, as if asserting ownership, then spotted her. Recognition flickered in his eyes, though he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Ah, the waitress," he said under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. "The one from last time." She approached with calm confidence, not a hint of hesitation. "Good evening. Welcome back. May I get you started with drinks?" she asked politely. There was no tension in her voice, only professionalism and a subtle undertone of authority he didn't yet recognize. He waved a hand dismissively. "Bring them quickly," he said, the edge in his tone familiar. But this time, there was a subtle shift. She noticed it in his companions. A hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. Perhaps they had begun to notice something different about her composure, her calmness, and the way she managed the room. She took their orders with precision, double-checking every detail. She moved through the restaurant, coordinating with the kitchen and staff seamlessly, her presence commanding without needing to assert it loudly. Every step, every gesture was deliberate. She had learned that true authority was often silent. It didn't need announcements. It didn't demand respect through fear, and it didn't rely on loud words as the evening progressed. The CEO continued his attempts to dominate the conversation, speaking loudly to his companions, pointing out minor flaws, and clearly expecting her to react. But she remained unshaken. She served the dishes flawlessly, anticipating their preferences, correcting tiny issues before they became complaints, and managing the space with quiet authority. The guests around them remained oblivious, enjoying their meals, while the CEO slowly began to realize that his usual tactics were failing. There was a subtle shift in the room. His companions now watched him with faint surprise. He had been so certain that his status gave him control over everyone, yet here he was, facing someone who did not flinch, who did not falter, and who seemed entirely in command without raising her voice. His eyes darted back to her repeatedly, a mix of irritation and confusion crossing his face. When the meal concluded, she approached the table with the check, her demeanor calm, her expression polite but confident. "Here's your bill. Thank you for visiting," she said softly. He looked at the bill, then at her, and something in him shifted. There was a hesitation, a flicker of recognition, and a subtle unease he had not shown before. For the first time, he realized that the woman he had mocked, humiliated, and underestimated held a power he had not accounted for. Then she chose her moment. She took a deep breath and said quietly, but with clarity that carried over the table, "I think it's time you understood something. I am not just a waitress here. I am a silent partner and part owner of this restaurant. Every decision, every improvement, every step that has brought this place to where it is today, I have been involved in. And now you are seated at a table where your arrogance cannot dictate the rules." The room went silent. His companions froze, their eyes wide, as the words sank in. The CEO's face turned a pale shade of disbelief, his mouth opening slightly as if he wanted to speak, but could not. He had assumed power, influence, and authority came from appearances, titles, and money. Yet here was someone he had insulted, someone he had called trash, holding real power in her hands. For a long moment, she let the silence stretch, watching the realization dawn on him. Then she continued, calmly but firmly, "I've seen how you operate, how you rely on fear, how you assume status grants control. But here, it does not. Influence is earned, respect is given, and authority is recognized by those who understand value, skill, and patience. Words cannot replace these qualities. You underestimated me because you judged by appearances. That was your mistake. His companions stared, astonished. They had witnessed his dominance before, yet now they saw a new reality. He had been humbled not by confrontation or aggression, but by quiet strength, knowledge, and the timing of someone who understood her environment fully. He finally found words, though they came out rough and uncertain. You're the owner? He stammered, trying to mask his disbelief. All this time? Yes, she said softly, with a calm smile. And all this time, I've been learning, observing, and preparing. I've seen how people like you behave. I've seen arrogance, disrespect, and entitlement. And I've seen how easily those who rely solely on appearances can be revealed. The restaurant staff, who had been watching discreetly from the edges, exchanged looks of amazement and quiet pride. They had always respected her calm presence, her skill, and her fairness. Now they understood fully why. The woman they had seen every day as a server was someone who had quietly shaped the restaurant's success, guided its growth, and ensured that the workplace was fair, supportive, and thriving. The CEO's face slowly shifted from disbelief to realization, a hard lesson settling in. He had assumed he could intimidate, humiliate, and control her with arrogance and status. He had been completely unprepared for the quiet, strategic strength she held, the strength that came from knowledge, patience, and true understanding of influence. She watched him carefully, her composure intact. The next time you think to belittle someone based on appearances, she said quietly, remember that power is not always visible, and respect is not given because someone demands it. It is earned, and it can be withheld when it is deserved. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, only calm, quiet authority, the kind that leaves a lasting impression far stronger than shouting or intimidation. Her words hung in the air, clear and undeniable, and for the first time, the arrogant CEO understood what it meant to face someone whose quiet strength surpassed his assumptions. After a long pause, he finally nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of his mistake. His companions, too, now looked at her with new respect, realizing that the situation was far more complex than they had imagined. What had started as arrogance and disrespect had ended in a revelation, a clear lesson about the nature of power, patience, and quiet influence. She smiled softly, returning to her station, her presence calm and assured. The evening continued around her, but the dynamic had shifted completely. The arrogant CEO had been humbled not by confrontation, but by quiet authority, strategic knowledge, and the revelation of her true role. She had turned a moment of insult into a demonstration of her power, leaving an impression that would last far longer than the meal they had shared. And in that moment, she understood fully why she had chosen to remain a silent partner for so long. True power, she knew, was not about being seen or loud. It was about understanding, patience, and timing. It was about holding influence quietly, guiding events subtly, and letting those who underestimated you discover it on their own. She had done exactly that, and the lesson had been learned, not just by the arrogant man, but by everyone who had witnessed the encounter. That night, as she closed the restaurant, she felt a quiet satisfaction, unlike any she had known before. The balance of power had shifted, respect had been asserted, and her patience and skill had been proven. She had transformed humiliation into authority, arrogance into understanding, and insult into a demonstration of quiet, unassailable strength. And she knew this was only the beginning. The days after the revelation were quiet, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed subtly yet unmistakably. Staff moved with renewed confidence, a new energy humming through the dining room. Customers continued to enjoy their meals, unaware of the shift, but for those who worked there, everything felt different. Respect, understanding, and trust had deepened, and she could feel it in the small things. A glance of appreciation from a server, a quiet smile from a busboy, the subtle nod of acknowledgement from the kitchen staff. She continued her work as usual, taking orders, serving dishes, and managing the flow of the restaurant with practiced efficiency. Yet every action now carried a quiet authority, a confidence that came from knowing that her value was recognized not just by herself, but by those who mattered. She had revealed her role strategically, at the perfect moment, and the lesson had been clear. Arrogance could be challenged without aggression. Disrespect could be countered with calm authority. And influence could be wielded quietly, yet powerfully. The CEO returned several times after that night, but his demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the loud arrogance, replaced by careful politeness and subtle caution. He never again attempted to belittle her or assert dominance in the restaurant. In fact, he treated the staff with more respect, aware now that appearances could be deceptive, and that those he had underestimated held far more influence than he had imagined. She observed these changes quietly, noting how behavior shifted not through confrontation or anger, but through the revelation of truth and strategic action. She realized that her choice to remain a silent partner for so long had allowed her to act with precision when the moment was right. By staying hidden, observing, and learning, she had accumulated knowledge and influence that no arrogance could challenge. And in revealing herself at the right time, she had not only asserted her authority, but also transformed the environment around her. The staff, too, began to notice the subtle power she held. They no longer saw her as just a server. They saw a leader in action, someone who understood every detail of the business, who cared deeply about fairness, and who had the patience and wisdom to guide the restaurant to success. Her actions had demonstrated the value of quiet strength, of strategic thinking, and of resilience in the face of disrespect. One evening, a few weeks later, the CEO requested a meeting in a private room of the restaurant. She agreed, knowing that this was an opportunity to establish a professional understanding, to set boundaries, and to ensure mutual respect moving forward. When he arrived, there was a noticeable difference in his posture and demeanor. He was polite, reserved, and careful with his words, clearly aware of the power dynamic that had shifted. "I wanted to speak with you directly," he began, his tone measured. "I misjudged you the last time I visited. I see now that my assumptions were wrong. I want to apologize for my behavior and acknowledge the role you play here." She listened, calm and composed, allowing him to speak fully before responding. "Thank you," she said simply. "Acknowledgement is important, but what matters most is how we move forward. Respect is earned through action, not status or money. That is a lesson I hope you understand now." He nodded, a flicker of humility crossing his face. "I do," he said quietly, "and I want to make sure that any future interaction, business or otherwise, is based on respect and fairness. I see now that underestimating anyone can have consequences." Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Exactly," she said. "Influence is not always visible. Power is not always loud. And leadership is shown not through words alone, but through consistent action, patience, and understanding." The conversation ended with mutual understanding, though she remained aware of the subtle lessons she had imparted. She had not sought revenge or confrontation. She had acted with strategy, patience, and quiet authority. The CEO's respect had been earned not through anger or force, but through composure, intelligence, and timing. Back on the restaurant floor, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the early days of investing quietly, observing, and learning, to the night of humiliation and the eventual revelation of her true role, every step had been deliberate. She had learned that appearances could be deceiving, arrogance could be disarmed, and respect could be commanded through calm and competence. Her relationship with the staff had deepened as well. They saw her not just as a server or a business partner, but as someone who understood their challenges, valued their contributions, and led with both wisdom and empathy. She had demonstrated that true influence was not about domination, but about understanding, guiding, and empowering others. Over time, the restaurant continued to grow. It became known not only for its food, but also for its culture, one of respect, fairness, and quiet excellence. Guests commented on the warmth and efficiency of the staff, unaware of the subtle leadership that had shaped the environment. She continued to work alongside them, maintaining her presence both as a server and as a guiding force behind the scenes. Occasionally, she would encounter other difficult customers, individuals who attempted to assert arrogance or dominance. But she had learned to handle these moments with ease. Each encounter became an opportunity to demonstrate composure, skill, and quiet authority. She had transformed humiliation into experience, arrogance into insight, and disrespect into strategy. The CEO eventually became a regular visitor, but his approach had changed completely. He treated the staff with courtesy, acknowledged the restaurant's successes, and even sought advice on small matters, recognizing the value of knowledge and experience beyond titles. The dynamic that had once been tense and disrespectful was now professional, respectful, and mutually beneficial. She had proven something more important than business acumen or financial investment. She had proven that character, patience, and strategic thinking were more powerful than arrogance, insults, or status. The experience had reinforced her belief that influence is built quietly, strength is demonstrated subtly, and respect is earned through consistent action, not appearances. On a quiet evening, as she closed the restaurant and walked through the empty dining room, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had turned a moment of insult into a lesson in authority. She had revealed her true role at the right time, ensuring that arrogance met humility and disrespect met composure. She had guided the restaurant through challenges, empowered her staff, and left a lasting impression on those who had underestimated her in her mind. She reflected on the lessons of the journey: patience, observation, quiet strategy, and consistent action were the true markers of influence. Arrogance could be challenged without aggression. Disrespect could be transformed into opportunity, and authority could be wielded silently yet powerfully. She had embodied these lessons, proving that appearances are often misleading, and that true power resides in those who act with understanding, skill, and foresight. As she locked the doors and stepped into the cool night, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The arrogant CEO had learned a lesson. The staff had witnessed true leadership, and the restaurant had grown into the thriving, respected place she had always envisioned. She had taken the journey from silent partner to revealed authority, navigating challenges with wisdom, patience, and unwavering composure. And in that moment, she understood fully that this was more than just a victory over arrogance. It was a testament to the power of quiet strength, the importance of patience, and the undeniable influence of those who act with clarity, strategy, and dignity. She had turned insult into authority, disrespect into a lesson, and observation into empowerment. The restaurant had flourished, the staff had thrived, and she had proven to herself, and to those who underestimated her, that true power is often silent, subtle, and unshakable.